All right, makers, today we're checking out a printer that claims it can handle speed, multicolor, and day-to-day reliability, all in one tiny box. The Flashforge AD5X. I've run this thing through quite a number of test prints, including a few that pushed its patience and mine. So if you're wondering whether this machine is worth adding to your workshop, you are in the right place. Let's get into it. Here's the plan for today's review. We'll start with an overview of the AD5X's features and specs, what Flashforge promises, and how it's supposed to stack up in real-world use. Then, I'll walk you through the unboxing and setup experience. After that, we'll jump into a full set of test prints. First, there's the multicolor Benchy that's included with the printer. We'll do a first layer test, the Orca tolerance test, the Phil-A-Ment test, the M test, and the Polypearl Tower Torture test. And since real-world printing is where a machine proves itself, I also ran a Gridfinity parts box, the waste bin, a TPU gummy bear, and a full-scale Borderlands Ripper mask. Finally, we'll go over the pros and cons, and I'll wrap up with my final thoughts. Before I do that, I'd like to know if you'd consider an open frame printer like the AD5X. Let me know down in the comments. All right, let's hit the specs. So the Flashforge AD5X has a pretty compelling feature set for any beginner to intermediate maker who wants capability without diving into the DIY multi-material madness. First, build volume comes in at 220 by 220 by 220 millimeters, a very practical size that handles most hobby prints without dominating your desk. It's running on a CoreXY motion system, which gives it the speed and stability it advertises. And yeah, that's always good news when you want clean corners at higher accelerations. Speaking of speed, Flashforge claims move speeds up to 600 millimeters per second with 20,000 millimeters per second squared acceleration. The upper end of print speeds is 300 millimeters per second, which is in the normal range for a printer in this class. Then there's the 4-color Intelligent Filament System, or IFS. 4 spools mounted on the right side of the printer, automatic switching, so you'll have multicolor without needing third-party add-ons. It's tidy, compact, and much easier than building your own MMU. The hot end hits 300 degrees Celsius and supports multiple nozzle sizes. A 0.4 millimeter nozzle comes with the printer, and 0.25, 0.6, and 0.8 millimeter nozzles are available. The build plate is a flexible PEI spring steel sheet, which is always great for adhesion and even better for popping prints off cleanly. Leveling is essentially one-button auto leveling, making initial setup and maintenance painless. Material compatibility is solid. PLA, PLA Pro, high-speed PLA, PLA Matte, PLA Silk, TPU 64D, PETG, PETG Pro, high-speed PETG, and ASA, although I probably wouldn't attempt that last one unless you spring for the optional enclosure kit. It also has power loss recovery and filament runout detection baked into the system. Connectivity options are actually impressive for this class. We have the standard USB port, which is mounted on the side of the screen, Wi-Fi, both 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz, as well as wired Ethernet, which is great for workshop networks or anyone who hates flaky wireless connections. Control is via a 4.3-inch touchscreen, which is bright and responsive enough. Although this is a resistive touchscreen and not the capacitive touchscreen you'll likely find on more expensive machines. On paper, this is a well-rounded, speed-capable, multicolor CoreXY machine aimed at people who want to print and not tinker endlessly. But before we crack into the rest of the review, I'd like to take a moment to ask you to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and hit the notification bell so you know when I drop new content. If anything pops into your mind during the video, good or bad, please take a moment to comment. Comments really help YouTube know that people are engaged with the channel. Now, let's get back at it. Setup is refreshingly simple. Flashforge says 3 steps, and honestly, it's not that far off. First, you'll remove the screen from the shipping bracket and slot it into place. It has a fixed pitch, so don't try and adjust the view angle down the road. After removing the foam and freeing the parts and accessories, it's time to attach the IFS bracket, the IFS itself, and the 4-in-1 guide to the tool head, along with the associated PTFE tubing. A tiny bit of cable management follows, and then the spool holders attached to the numbered locations on the right side of the machine. The final step is the removal of the shipping screws that hold the build plate during shipping. With all of that out of the way, the machine powered right up and I was presented with the normal choices for language selection and Wi-Fi setup. Once those selections are complete, the machine goes through a calibration routine, which will take a couple minutes. Upon completion, you'll be invited to load some filament. Flashforge sent me 3 rolls of PLA and 1 roll of PETG for this review, which I loaded up on the machine. Once you insert a filament into the IFS, it takes over from there. There are no fancy RFID readers on this machine, so you'll need to set the filament type and color on the display manually. When you've loaded the filament, you'll be presented with the option to complete a test print, which is a small token bearing the Flashforge logo. From opening the box to first extrusion, I'd say I was printing in maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Pretty painless for a multi-filament machine. Before we get to the test prints, let's talk about the software. The default slicer for the AD5X is Orca Flashforge. This is a reskinned version of Orca Slicer, so it should be fairly familiar to anyone that has used recent FDM slicers. Unlike many of the other popular branches of slicers, Flashforge does not have an online model repository, so you don't have to worry about a bunch of extra stuff on the home screen. You'll just see your recently opened files and 2 large buttons at the top, allowing you to create a new project or open up a 3MF file. The slicer is very similar to Orca Slicer with a few redesigned icons. If you've connected your printer to Wi-Fi and set up your cloud connection, you'll see the printer on the Devices page. From this page, you can see the status of the printer, including details like print progress, nozzle and bed temperatures, IFS filament information, and the live camera view if you've purchased it separately or as part of a bundle. The Flashforge mobile app called Flash Maker offers similar features. From your mobile device, you can check on the status of the printer and the IFS as well as edit the filament properties such as type and color. The notifications section will show you past messages. You can also look at your account information, which shows a print history that gives even more details, including the time each job took to complete. It is possible to use Orca Slicer in its pure form to connect and print to the AD5X over Wi-Fi or LAN, but you will lose some functionality. I'm not sure if there are any benefits that you'll gain that outweigh what you lose. Now, on to the test prints. First up, the Benchy. I printed the multicolored Benchy that is preloaded in the AD5X's 8 GB of internal memory. The file calls for 4 colors, but since one of the filaments I loaded up was PETG, I opted to go with 3 colors instead. The results actually surprise me, as this is one of the cleanest Benchies I've ever printed. The text on the bottom is crisp, the hull quality is good, ghosting artifacts are minimal, and the overhangs are pretty good with only a minor amount of filament drop. The horizontal surfaces appear well extruded. Next, I ran a few first layer tests. I started with the Aurora Green high-speed PLA. The first layer test showed some signs of under extrusion, but not too terribly. The borders did separate at the right and top. There were a few areas toward the rear, left, and right that showed signs of over extrusion. This indicates a deviation in Z height, likely as a result of the probing process. Next, I ran the same test using the high-speed PETG metallic red filament using the Flashforge profile for this particular filament. In contrast to the previous test, this print had numerous ripples, which can be a sign of overextrusion. I ran a calibration test, adjusted my flow rate, and reprinted the test. The second print was greatly improved, but some of the ripples persisted, and they were more pronounced on the left side of the bed. There are many other factors that can impact a first layer test like this, including print speed and bed leveling. Next, I ran the tolerance test that is available in Flashforge's reskinned version of Orca Slicer. This file was printed in the high-speed PLA that they sent, and I was able to fit the hexagon all the way down to the 0.05 hole, which is a pretty good result. My next test was the Matter Hackers 3D fill test. The version I used was the Phil-A-Ment file for single extruder printers. This little astronaut has several challenging areas to test how well a printer performs. These include overhangs, such as the bottom of the boots, the bottom of the gloves, and the backpack. There are also a number of inset details that can prove challenging. The helmet also shows off surface quality and how well a printer handles spherical prints. This model was printed in Flashforge's Aurora Green high-speed PLA. The model came out looking better than the test prints I ran on my Bambu Lab A1, P1S, and the Anycubic Cobra S1. It was on par with the Bambu Lab H2D. The quality, details, and surface quality are all excellent, and the overhangs are perfect. The only imperfection I noted was the filament contamination on the bottom of the boot, likely due to poor nozzle cleaning. The following chart shows the printer, slicer settings, filament, height of the model, filament usage, and the time to print as reported when slicing for comparison. The next test I printed was the all-in-one test print by MPOXDE. This model features several tests such as dimensional accuracy, overhang, and tolerance tests. The top test measured 70.05 millimeters versus the expected 70 millimeters, and the bottom cube measured 18 millimeters, which is exactly what it should be. The 0.25 millimeter tolerance flap opened easily. The 0.2 tolerance cube broke free easily as well. Unfortunately, with the default settings and flow rates calibrated by the printer, none of the other tolerance tests would budge. After calibrating the flow rate and pressure advance for this filament, I reprinted the test, and all of the tolerance items came free except for the center 0.15 millimeter test screw. Although I wasn't able to break it free using the included tool, I was able to snap it free using a metal screwdriver. My final torture test was the Polypearl Tower Torture test from Polymaker. Again, this model is full of features to stress the printer, filament, and settings. Once again, this model was printed out of the Aurora Green high-speed PLA. The three legs of the tower are all at 45-degree angles, and they should be smooth and uniform, as you can see here. The tiny pillars under the front pavilion are another area where the AD5X excelled. Again, it was on par with the H2D. Of the four printers I've tested this against, only the H2D was able to print the top ball overhang without error. Well, that was until now. The AD5X handled this in fine fashion. However, there were some issues with the middle spiral towers and the tip. With the test prints complete, I wanted to see how the AD5X performed with TPU, and I was actually surprised at how well it handled this wiggly filament. All of my other multi-filament printers use a material handling system, and unless the TPU is specifically made for that system, like Bambu Labs TPU for AMS, they require an alternate feed path in order to print that TPU. I figured I'd see what I could do with the IFS on the AD5X, so I grabbed my iBoss Polyphemus filament dryer, sat it next to and under the IFS, popped in some Giant Arm 95A TPU, and ran it right up to the IFS. It fed the filament right to the tool head, and I was able to instruct the printer to load the filament without any issue. Then I loaded up my test gummy bear file and set the filament to the included Flashforge TPU 95A profile. I didn't encounter any problems during this print, and it came out just beautifully. I will note that I then tried to print a separate file, and when I came back to check the finished print, it had almost entirely air printed. This may be due to the way that I had things loaded. The filament spools have a retraction spring that my setup bypassed. I ran the filament loading process again, and then the second print completed just fine. I also wanted to print some functional items, so I started with this Gridfinity parts box to organize some screws and bolts I use routinely in my business. The shell was printed in PLA, while the clasps and bins were printed in PETG. The second print I mentioned previously when discussing TPU were the feet for this box. Everything looks great and the finish is superb. The new studio was in need of a waste bin, so I found this model and figured it would look pretty cool when printed in one of the color-changing filaments that Flashforge provided. The print took 11 hours and 12 minutes to complete. Overall, the print looks terrific. However, there were a couple of spots near the top with some odd defects, the cause of which I've not been able to determine. The final print I threw at the AD5X was this Borderlands Ripper mask that I downloaded from Printables. Since I didn't want a color changing mask, I chose to use some PLA filament from my Anycubic review to see how the AD5X would handle it. I used red as the main color, then added blue and white highlights in the same areas as my last review. Here are the estimates from the Flashforge slicer. I sent the job to the printer and settled in for the estimated 1 day, 4 hour, and 20-minute print. The print completed without any issues whatsoever, and my machine reported a print time of 1 day, 4 hours, and 30 minutes. The mask was estimated to consume 326 grams of filament, including supports, and the model came in at 314 grams when placed on the scale. The tower was 38 grams versus an estimate of 39.65 grams. One thing to note, and I'll bring this up now, is that Flashforge's fork of Orca Slicer does not give you the estimate of the amount of filament that is purged during a print. This amount, as you have seen in this example, can be easily more than the amount of filament used for the actual model if there are a lot of filament changes. This is one of the downsides to single nozzle multi-filament printers. So now that you've seen how the printer performed in all of those tests and prints, let's discuss the pros and cons, starting with the pros. First up, excellent performance. I have been quite amazed at just how well this machine prints, and I've been spoiled by some very high quality printers. I wasn't expecting such fantastic results from a budget printer. This machine has printed everything I have sent to it with excellent results. Second, simple and reliable multicolor performance. Although you can't go beyond 4 spools on this printer, it is nice to have a machine that can do multicolor printing without taking up a bunch of additional space. This performs like a Bambu Lab A1 without the need for the AMS light, and it's a CoreXY machine. Third, the AD5X handles TPU better than expected. TPU can be a hassle to print, especially on my more expensive printers. With the AD5X, I was able to put my filament dryer right up next to the printer, feed the TPU up through one of the top holes right into the IFS, and it fed the filament right to the extruder. Fourth, good reliability over long prints. I don't do multi-day prints very often, and when I do, it's not uncommon for something to go wrong. Sometimes it's a support that breaks free from the build plate or something similar to that. If you saw my last 3D printer review, the same multicolor Ripper mask took several days due to an error. This little printer tackled the same print and did not miss a beat. Next, truly quick swap nozzles. The tool head cover is held on with some pegs on the top and magnets on the bottom. The front-mounted cooling fan is electrically connected with metal contacts, so it comes off easily and you don't have to worry about small connectors. The nozzle is held in with a combination of a spring clip that holds it against the heating element and an aluminum heatsink that magnetically clamps around the heat break. You can easily swap nozzles in less than a minute. And finally, multiple connectivity options, USB, Wi-Fi, and Ethernet. Unlike many of the devices I've been testing recently, this printer supports both 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi, which is nice to see. If Wi-Fi isn't your thing, you also get an actual Ethernet port. I don't know why Ethernet isn't more common on 3D printers. If you have security concerns, it's nice to be able to count on a fast, reliable communication path that doesn't involve Wi-Fi or moving files via USB. And now, let's discuss the area where I think the AD5X falls a bit short. Fortunately, all of the cons are pretty minor in comparison to how well it prints. First, the PTFE tubes that run from the IFS to the tool head are kind of hard to remove. They have a different connector than anything I've seen before. They're much smaller, and as such, they present a little bit of a challenge to work with. I had some filament break off from the spool, and when I tried to remove it from the IFS, it broke again right at the bottom inlet. I had to remove the tubes in order to clear it out. I actually had to go online to figure out how to remove these tubes because I was afraid I was doing something wrong. It turns out that they work the same as most other PTFE connectors, but since the ring is so much smaller, it's hard to compress it while pulling. There is a tool that somebody has designed to make it easier to remove the tubes from the 4-in-1 connector on the tool head, and I'll post a link for that down below. Second, during setup, I could not find the FlashMaker app in the Google Play Store. I had to go online and search to find out that it had to be downloaded as an APK and sideloaded. Navigating to the website on a phone only gives a QR code that you need to scan, so I had to open up the site on my PC and then scan the photo with my phone so that I could get the APK and then load it on to my phone. So it's a little cumbersome. Hopefully they can clean that up. Third, and I may have to admit that I may be spoiled from using Bambu Studio, but Orca Flashforge does not sync filaments loaded on the printer. I checked to see if this was unique to Orca slicer forks, but any cubic slicer next does have that feature. Hopefully it's something that Flashforge updates in the future. And finally, they really need to add purge waste to the slicer. I realize that Orca Slicer natively doesn't show this value, but many other slicers like Bamboo Studio and Anycubic's Orca Slicer Fork show this useful information. You may find yourself passing on some multicolor prints when you realize how much waste it will generate, so it is nice to know before you hit the print button. It's actually hard to come up with too many cons that aren't just due to me being spoiled with more expensive printers. Since there is no camera, you won't have things like spaghetti detection or air printing detection, or the ability to remotely monitor the prints visually. There is a camera and LED light available, but at the time that I'm recording this, the camera is actually sold out. These aren't any fault of Flashforge, and you have to make some concessions to keep the price down on a budget printer such as the AD5X. And now, for a new section of my reviews, minor quibbles. These aren't necessarily cons, but they are things that were slightly annoying that I figured I'd mention. One quirk is the finish printing screen. It tells you that the print is finished and how long it took, and that you can print again when the bed is cleared. Two buttons are presented. One is OK, and the other is Continue. If you hit Continue, it will print the same model again. If you hit OK, it takes you back to the home screen and the printer sits idle. This is a bit confusing. One plus side is that the printer will not accept a new job in this state over the cloud. When I tried to send another model, the slicer won't let you select the printer because it's not ready. You might still have an object on the build plate, although you could have removed it and just forgotten to hit the choice on the screen. You can clear this via the slicer though if you are sure that everything is ready for a new print. Alright, let's wrap this up. After running all of these tests and a bunch of real-world prints, here's my take. The Flashforge AD5X is a genuinely strong competitor for anyone wanting speed, multicolor capability, and reliability without the hassle of building and tuning your own multi-material setup. Print quality is consistently good, the color system works better than expected, and the overall user experience is just smooth. If you're a beginning to intermediate maker looking for a fast, feature-rich, workshop-friendly printer, then this one belongs on your shortlist. This is an easy, positive recommendation from me. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the open storage of this printer. Depending on where you operate it, you may need to factor in keeping your filament dry. Even filament like PLA can become brittle if exposed to moisture for too long. As you saw with my TPU example, you may be able to run it from a filament dryer, and there are some cleverly designed modifications that you can pop on the side to keep your filament dry. If you're even the least bit curious about this printer, now is an excellent time to pick one of these up and embark on a 3D printing adventure. Flashforge is currently running their Black Friday sale, and the AD5X is only $319. That's an incredible price for such a great printer. I do have an affiliate link, which I've listed in the description, and if you do decide to go with this printer, I'd greatly appreciate you using my link. Thanks for watching. Let me know what printer torture test you want to see next. And as always, let's keep on learning, burning, printing, and growing together. Take care, everyone.